Welcome back to Echoes of the Unknown. The Dark Rebellion, Episode 1, Dual Nature. In the dark, narrow halls of Santa's workshop, a goblin-elf runs. His breathing is ragged, eyes wide with fear. Flickering lights cast monstrous shadows on the walls. Strange symbols carved into the beams pulse with every beat of his panicked heart. The walls close in on him, every corner darker, every step harder to take. The floorboards creak beneath his feet, as if the very workshop is trying to betray him. The sound of Krampus's guttural growl echoes behind him. Eerie whispers mock his struggle. Each growl makes the walls shiver, the air vibrating with an unnatural chill. He stumbles, falling to the ground, his hands scraping against splintered wood. The pain barely registers over his fear. He looks back. Shadows stretch and twist into a horned beast. Red eyes glow. Claws scrape against the walls, leaving deep, dark gouges. The beast seems formed from darkness itself, its shape shifting, tendrils of shadow curling like hungry serpents. The growling grows louder. The shadow draws closer, and the goblin-elf whispers in desperation, "No, please." He pushes himself backward, feet slipping on the cold, dusty floor. The whispers grow into a chorus of mocking laughter, twisted faces flickering just out of sight. The shadow beast lunges, claws outstretched. The goblin-elf squeezes his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. This isn't the cheerful place you imagine. Santa's workshop is dark, foreboding, filled with unsettling whispers and shadows that move on their own. The walls are lined with shelves of half-finished toys, their glassy eyes staring blankly into the void as if they too have witnessed the horrors here. Cold air hangs thickly, every breath visible as a mist that vanishes immediately, swallowed by the darkness. Symbols carved into beams seem to shift when glanced at, alive, telling stories of something ancient and malevolent. The distant sound of disembodied laughter chills you to the bone, echoing in a way that makes it impossible to tell where it's coming from, giving the impression that the workshop itself is alive and watching. Santa appears, though not as you know him. He stands only 24 inches tall, with a grin that's too wide, showing far too many teeth. His eyes flash red, unnaturally, just for a second, but it's enough to send a shiver down your spine. His steps echo through the quiet, almost menacing, the echoes bouncing, as if the workshop itself fears him. The floorboards creak beneath the weight of something more than him, as though some unseen force is following in his footsteps. He moves through the workshop, inspecting the goblin cobblers. They toil away, weary and fearful. Their hollow eyes speak of endless labor. Their hands trembling, splinters embedded in their fingertips. Bruises mar their skin, evidence of what Krampus has done before. The goblin cobblers flinch as Santa walks by, avoiding eye contact, their breaths shallow, fear almost palpable. They know what lurks beneath the jolly exterior, what might emerge if they displease him. One goblin-elf hesitates for a second too long, and Santa pauses, red eyes narrowing. The room grows colder, shadows darker, as if the workshop itself holds its breath. As Santa walks by, the whispers grow louder, almost as if the workshop itself knows, and warns of the dual nature of its master. The lights flicker, and for just a moment, the shadow that follows Santa grows horns, its claws stretching out towards the nearest goblin-elf before retreating. Santa smiles, his too wide grin splitting his face, and the goblin-elf quickly looks away, hands trembling as he resumes his work. The whispers growing softer, but never fully fading. The workshop, once thought to be a place of magic and cheer, reveals itself to be something far more sinister, an echo of despair, where every corner hides secrets and every shadow has teeth. The goblin cobblers work tirelessly, their hands trembling as they assemble the toys under the dim, flickering lights of the workshop. The air grows colder, and the temperature seems to plummet with every passing second. Santa, in his small, almost doll-like form, stands in the center of the room, watching. His eyes flash red for an instant, and before the goblin cobblers can even react, the transformation begins. Without warning, Santa's grin twists into a monstrous snarl, a grimace that spreads too wide across his face, revealing rows of jagged, pointed teeth. His body begins to contort, his joints cracking, his limbs elongating as he grows larger and more menacing. His red suit seems to stretch and tear, revealing dark fur underneath. The transformation feels endless, as if time itself is slowing down, each moment filled with growing dread. The goblin cobblers can only watch, frozen in fear, as the cheerful figure they knew twists into something monstrous. Krampus now stands where Santa once was, towering over the cobblers, his eyes glowing a deep, burning red. The room seems to react. The lights flicker erratically, frost creeping up the wooden beams, and the once steady hum of the workshop turns into an eerie, echoing silence. Krampus lashes out. His massive hand grabs one of the smaller cobblers, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. The goblin-elf struggles, his feet kicking in the air as Krampus's claws dig into his skin, leaving dark marks. The shadow behind Krampus stretches out, taking on the form of a monstrous, horned beast. Its claws rake against the walls, leaving deep gouges that seem to seep darkness, as if the shadows themselves are alive and hungry. The walls shudder with each movement, as if the workshop itself is recoiling in fear. The other goblin cobblers look on in terror, their hollow eyes reflecting the red glow of Krampus's fury. They tremble, frozen in place, as Krampus berates them, his voice a twisted mix of deep growls and maniacal laughter. The cold air grows colder still, and the floor beneath them seems to vibrate with each word he speaks. Grimble's heart pounds, fear twisting in his chest, but something else begins to grow. Anger. How long could they keep living like this, cowering in fear? He thinks of the endless nights, the bruises on his companions, the hopelessness that has taken hold of them. A spark ignites inside him, small but fierce. They couldn't continue like this. Not anymore. Grimble, a clever and observant goblin elf, notices the growing dissatisfaction among the other goblin cobblers. He sees the dark claw marks appearing on the walls whenever Krampus takes over, as if something monstrous is always lurking beneath Santa's cheerful facade, waiting to break free. He watches as Krampus moves from goblin-elf to goblin-elf, inspecting their work, his eyes glowing with malice. Each goblin-elf cowers, their hands trembling, the sound of their shallow breaths filling the silence of the workshop. Grimble feels a surge of protectiveness for his fellow cobblers, a sense of responsibility. He knows that something must change. He quietly approaches a small group of goblin cobblers, his voice low and urgent. "We can't let this continue," he whispers, his eyes darting around to make sure they aren't being watched. He describes what he has seen: the shifting shadows, the monstrous transformations, the cruelty that grows each day. The goblin cobblers listen, their fear evident, but something else begins to stir within them. The fear on their faces begins to shift, slowly turning into anger. One goblin cobbler speaks up, his voice shaking. "But Grimble, what if he catches us?" Grimble takes a deep breath, his voice steady. "I know the risks, we all do. But we can't keep living like this. The bruises, the fear, the endless work. It will never stop unless we do something. We know this workshop better than Krampus ever could. We know the hidden places, the passages. He pauses, looking each of them in the eyes. If we work together, we can outsmart him. Grimble points towards a corner of the workshop, where the shadows are darkest. There are passages, he says, his voice barely audible. Hidden places where we can move without being seen. We know this workshop better than Krampus ever could. We can use that to our advantage. The goblin cobblers exchange glances, hesitant but intrigued. One of them, a smaller goblin elf with bruises on his arms, speaks up, his voice trembling. But what if he finds out? Grimble's eyes flash with determination. He won't. Not if we're careful. Not if we work together. They nod, slowly at first, then more decisively. Grimble's determination becomes contagious. He knows they have to act, and they have to act soon. He thinks of the others, of what they have endured, and his resolve hardens. Grimble's eyes flash with resolve as he whispers, "It's time we did something. We can't live like this anymore." The goblin cobblers continue to whisper among themselves, their eyes darting to Grimble, who stands determined. They are hesitant, but the air is different now. There's a spark of hope, something to hold on to in the midst of all the fear. Grimble motions for them to be quiet as he steps away, slipping into the darkened corridors of the workshop. He moves with purpose, his expression resolute. As he makes his way deeper into the workshop, the shadows around him seem to shift, and the faint growl of Krampus echoes from somewhere behind. Grimble's breath catches for a moment, but he doesn't flinch. Instead, he tightens his jaw, moving faster. The growls seem to grow closer, reverberating through the narrow passage, as if Krampus is right on his trail. Frost starts to appear on the beams, crawling across the walls like skeletal fingers, inch by inch. Grimble can feel the chill settle into his bones. He knows he has to act now. There is no turning back. Suddenly, the air grows even colder. Frost thickens and Grimble stops, his breath visible in the freezing air. In the distance, Grimble catches a glimpse of a shadow shifting unnaturally, and a subtle smirk crosses Krampus's face, as if he senses the rebellion forming beneath his nose. As Grimble rounds a corner, he sees Krampus in the distance, standing in the center of the workshop, his eyes glowing an intense, unnatural red. Krampus lets out a deep, guttural growl, his shadow twisting and stretching out from behind him, growing larger and more monstrous by the second. The shadow reaches for one of the goblin cobblers, and Grimble watches in horror as the goblin-elf is pulled into the darkness, his screams echoing throughout the workshop. Grimble knows he must move quickly. He turns and runs, his heart pounding, the whispers in the workshop now replaced with the frantic cries of the goblin cobblers. He knows what he has to do. There's no turning back now. He slips into a narrow passageway, away from Krampus's line of sight. The workshop seems to react, the lights flickering erratically and shadows twisting, almost alive. Grimble pushes forward, finding a small group of goblin cobblers huddled together, their eyes wide with terror. "It's time," he whispers. "We can't let this go on." He motions for them to follow him, and the camera pans over the cobblers' faces, fear slowly being replaced by determination. The small group of goblin cobblers moves carefully through the darkened passages, avoiding the flickering lights and the monstrous shadows that loom. Grimble leads them with quiet confidence, his eyes focused ahead, his mind racing with ideas for how to take down Krampus. He knows it won't be easy. Krampus is powerful, and the workshop itself seems almost alive, responding to his every move. But Grimble also knows that they have to try. Suddenly, a deep, guttural growl resonates, louder and closer this time. The shadows around them shift, forming into monstrous shapes. The goblin cobblers freeze, their breath caught in their throats. Grimble raises a hand, motioning for silence, but it's too late. A monstrous shadow lunges towards them, its claws outstretched, glowing red eyes piercing the darkness. Will they succeed, or will Krampus extinguish their hope before it even begins to take root? The answer lies in the next chapter of this dark rebellion.